Brad is our exec chairman of the board at Intuit. And he's also on a couple other boards, Nordstrom and SurveyMonkey, which you may have heard of. And so Brad also led our two big businesses, TurboTax and our small business ecosystem before becoming CEO. That includes QuickBooks. So long storied history at Intuit, but history before that too.
Yes.
And so under Brad's leadership, Intuit served 80 million customers and was number one, and still is, in tax and accounting software, was one of the best places to work every year in your tenure as an employee. I always appreciated that. Also one of the most admired companies, and also one of the most innovative companies, at least twice. Like many of you, Brad started in West Virginia, going to school, and then had a path that led him to becoming CEO of Intuit, as well as being on the board of several major companies. So Brad, take us back, since this will resonate with many of the students here, to graduating from Marshall. Brad's two daughters just graduated from college as well, one from Ohio State and one
Belmont University Law School.
So graduation is in the air. We have at least one senior here who also just graduated. So take us back to your graduation day. What were your hopes? What were your dreams? And then what led you here?
Well, first of all, Eileen, thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you out in the Silicon Valley. And I'm not going to evade the question, but I'm going to probably move you back even a little earlier than graduation day if I could. So my story began in Canova, West Virginia, and I have a shirt that I wear that says my story began in Canova. And it actually has a little West Virginia thing and a little star over there to the far left in the Southwest. But I had three formative moments in my life that sort of shaped who I am, and then it makes that graduation day discussion much more relevant. So the first was at the age of 6. I lived in that little town of Canova, and the one thing we did have was an airport. And that was both a blessing and what ended up being a fateful curse on that day, because in November 1970, a plane crashed at that airport, and it was just a little over a mile from my home. And so I was 6 years old, and we watched the mountain burn from my bedroom window. And I watched a community pull together as the Marshall plane crash basically became known. And I watched this rise from the ashes. And I learned at that moment, or probably later in life as I reflected back, that life is a team sport, and that character is revealed in times of adversity. And I saw the true character of West Virginia and the true character of Marshall University, but most importantly, the true character of humanity when we pull together and try to help each other get up off the ground. So that was what happened at the age of 6. In the 4th grade, I had a crush on a little redheaded girl, and she beat me in a spelling bee. And the next day, she wrote me a note and said, "You can't be my boyfriend because you're stupid." She was pretty insightful in the 4th grade, but when I went home that night, my IQ didn't go up, but my work ethic did. And I came to appreciate that really intelligence is applied effort. And for me, I've become that person that studies for the midterm the second day of the semester, practice, 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 and at the end of the day, let that speak for itself. The third and final formative moment was 9th grade. I had a really good friend that I'd gone through kindergarten through 9th grade with, and he had taken up boxing. And what started out practicing on the heavy bag ended up being practicing on his friends, and that evolved into what some of you may or may not have experienced in your life, which was a bully. And I stood up to him one day, and I lost. And I went home, and I thought my mom and dad and my brothers would be ashamed of me because I couldn't win that particular interaction. And my dad told me he was never more proud of me, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's a willingness to stand up and face the things that you're afraid of and have the willingness to just give it a try. And he enrolled me in martial arts, and by the time I was a senior, I had a black belt. And so coming out of that formative moment, I had 2 lessons that I took away. The first is stand up to the things that seem insurmountable or scary, because you'll find out that you can actually overcome those things in many cases. And the second is with a black belt, I decided to be a champion for the persecuted. Not to walk around with a bat cape and act like I'm going to be the savior, but I knew what it felt like to be a victim, and I never wanted anybody else to feel that way. So I've always wanted to champion those who need a voice. So that's sort of who I am. Life's a team sport. Intelligence is simply applied effort and work ethic. And stand up to the things that scare you the most and be a champion for those who need a voice. Graduation day, I come out of Marshall. I have 2 blessings. I have 2 job offers. One, to be a journalist with the Herald-Dispatch. The second, to join Pepsi's ranks as a management trainee. And I sat down with my dad. I said, I don't know what to do. If I make the wrong decision, my entire life is over. And my dad laughed because he knows life's like a roller coaster. You're going to go up, you're going to go down, but just enjoy the ride. But he said, look, I'm going to give you a little tip. Think about which one of those will make your heart beat the fastest, will surround you with people smarter than you, so you'll be able to learn and grow, and take the one that simply allows you to pay the bills. Don't chase the money and don't chase the title, because those will change over time. You might think that I had a clear answer, but I had to reflect. I left that conversation and I realized that on my way to getting a black belt, I had become a student instructor. And I discovered a joy in myself. I was more excited about watching my students advance than I was getting any sort of accolades or trophies myself. And so I leaned into the management training program at Pepsi. And the rest was history. 7 years in packaged goods, managing drivers, to calling on headquarter accounts, to running manufacturing plants. 4 years in direct mail, where I got close to database modeling, which is now big data and algorithms. 6 years in marketing, and then launching an internet division and a payroll company, and then 16 years at Intuit. But it was all about realizing early on, you're not in the tech business, or you're not a newspaper writer. We're all in the people business. And if you learn how to be a really good team player, you will be successful in whatever profession you choose.
Tell us a story about how those lessons, you use those lessons as CEO.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the one thing that I have benefited from is a breadth of experience, as opposed to becoming narrowly focused and trying to become an expert in one thing. Had the chance to run customer call centers, had a chance to run manufacturing plants, rode in the truck cab with Teamster drivers. And all those experiences taught me different sides of looking at a problem. And it also taught me how to lead with questions and not answers. Sometimes when you become an expert at something, you're quick to give an answer, but when you're actually asked to be a general manager or a leader, you have to lead with the right questions. Why is that what it is? You have to bring out the best of everybody. And so I think foundationally that experience led me to the CEO role, because I learned to lead with questions and not answers.
Which leads me into one of your famous sayings.
Yes.
That your title makes you a manager, but your people decide if you're a leader.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Well, we'll talk about this gentleman maybe in this conversation later, but Bill Campbell was the famous coach of the Valley. There's a book written about him called The $1 Trillion Coach that we can spend some time unpacking. Yeah. But he was the one who taught us that quote, which is, your title makes you a manager, your people will decide if you're a leader. Because leadership is not appointed, leadership is earned. A position may be appointed by a boss, but then people will decide whether you're worth following or not. And at the end of the day, what you discover is people want to know at the end of the day that you care about them more than you care about the project. And so we say people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Now, there's a wonderful poet. She's now passed. Her name is Maya Angelou. And she is famous for a quote. She said, people will never remember what you said. They will never remember what you did. But they'll always remember how you made them feel. I imagine if you think back to the people that had the biggest impact in your life, it'll be someone who made you feel a certain way. And so that's really what that process leads us to, which is, don't think because you got made the manager of a team that all of a sudden everyone's going to follow you. You now have to learn to lead differently. You have to learn to lead with questions. You have to assume people have greatness inside of them. And your job is to create the environment where that greatness emerges.
And so let's talk about Bill.
Yes.
Bill Campbell, the $1 Trillion Coach. Actually, there was a talk here just a week or two ago about Bill and his impact on Google. But he was a very good friend and mentor of yours. What are some of the things that he really taught you, and why did so many people follow Bill?
Well, Bill's story is worth reading, and if you get the chance to pick up the book, The $1 Trillion Coach, the title was designed to make you stop, because Bill coached Larry and Sergey and Eric Schmidt at Google, Steve Jobs at Apple, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Jack Dorsey at Square, myself and Scott Cook at Intuit. All those companies are $1 trillion market cap companies, or quickly on their way to becoming $1 trillion market cap companies. And so how was it that one individual who didn't come from the Silicon Valley, who grew up in Homestead, Pennsylvania, in a very poor steel mining town, and then was a football coach until his mid-30s, end up in the Silicon Valley becoming what they called the CEO whisperer? And the reason is because he learned everything he needed to know growing up in that small town in Appalachia, and then ultimately when he became a football coach. that your job is to create the environment for greatness to emerge and to learn to lead, not with domain expertise, but with great questions. And so Bill was a magician at basically, when he looked at me, he said to me once, when I see you, Brad, I see two people. The person you are today and the person you're capable of being. And I want to be that person that introduces those two. And so he could be tough on you when he needed to be tough, but at the end of the day, you knew that he loved you. And he always greeted everybody with a hug. He had a very loud, booming voice. He sounded like a gravelly old football coach. He was prone to use a few colorful words every now and then, but no one ever questioned his intent, because you knew at the end of the day he would always be there for you. And when he passed, unfortunately, a couple years ago, his memorial service was one of the most moving things that I've ever experienced in my life. It had the who's who of the Silicon Valley, the who's who of the East Coast, New York and Boston. It had cab drivers, bartenders, janitors, kids who had been coached by him. He had everyone there, and they all swore he was their best friend. That was Bill Campbell.
He touched a lot of lives
Yes, he did.
around the valley.
I will say one thing about Bill. It's interesting because this book is wonderful, and Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg and Alan Eagle and the team who put it together really did a great job. And his name does get quickly associated with the big companies because those big companies are really well known. But what a lot of people don't know is Bill spent more years with Intuit than any other company. He referred to it as the dirty fingernails company, the company that was willing to do the hard work that no one else really wanted to focus on. He was our second CEO. So after Scott Cook, our founder, stepped down, he became our CEO. And then after he stepped down after 5 years, we so badly didn't want to lose him that Scott made him the chairman of the board. And he served as the chairman for 16 years. So he was with us 21 years, longer than any of the other companies in the Valley. But we tend to be the best kept secret in the Valley, and Bill didn't mind keeping it that way. He loved it. He called us the little engine that could.
He loved Intuit.
Absolutely.
He stayed with us a long time, as you say, and he's much more famously associated with Steve Jobs and Google. But so how does a guy who's, as you say, from a small town in Appalachia, you probably know more of Bill's story than most of us because you spent so much time with him, end up, in a world where he navigated from being a football coach to Silicon Valley? What was his story? Do you know?
I do know his story. Bill had a loving family that grew up in Homestead, Pennsylvania. His brother went to Annapolis to the Naval Academy, ended up playing football with Roger Staubach, who went on to be the famous quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and had a storied history in and of himself. And Bill ended up going to Columbia, played football, and I think was 168 pounds soaking wet, but ended up being All-American captain of the team, and the only time that Columbia won the All-Ivy football national championship for the Ivy League. So he is famous for that because he was probably the smallest team. He played on the offensive line at 160-some pounds. And then he went on to be a coach. And he not only coached there for a while, he also had a chance to coach at Boston. But he did not have a winning record. And so people would often ask him, what made you leave coaching to go to the business world? And he said, did you ever see my record? But I think that actually formed why Bill became the great leader that he was, because any leader that you get introduced to, and they always start out with these accolades, the first thing the leader will say is, I wish you would have introduced me with all the mistakes and the failures I have, because that's actually what created who I am today. And so Bill left the coaching profession with some humility. He went on to an ad agency, I think it was J. Walters Thompson. He went to Kodak back in the days when Kodak film was still #1 before digital cameras had wiped it out. He saw Kodak literally ignoring all the competitive threats, and he kept trying to get them to change, and they wouldn't, and he got frustrated, and he got a phone call, as fate would have it, from the West Coast saying, do you want to change the world? Would you like to join Apple? So he came out to lead Apple's sales and marketing organization. If you've ever seen the history of Apple, there was a famous commercial that they ran in a Super Bowl ad that basically was against, at the time, IBM, and it was the Orwellian,
1984.
And 1984, and Bill was actually famous for, the board did not want to run that ad, and Bill made the decision to run the ad, and he put his career on the line, and it went down in history. It's the #1 Super Bowl ad ever produced to this day. And so he ended up at Apple, and then from there they spun off a software division called Claris. He was the CEO of that. He became the CEO of multiple other startups. Many of those startups did not succeed, but the one thing Bill became known for is every time the startup shut down, his senior staff ended up being CEOs of other companies. And somebody started to notice, wow, whether that business succeeded or not, this person grows leaders. And so his alumni became the CEOs of every single company in the Valley. And the next thing you know, everyone began to call him and say, will you coach my CEO? So that's probably a less than grand description. Bill had a big impact, but that's sort of his journey line.
Wow, it's a great story. And we are spending time talking about Bill because he was such an important part of Intuit and the culture. And so one other thing I wanted to bring up is I remember the story of Bill and the Multipliers and how he started not as a multiplier, and he had to be coached, and his own people taught him, going back to the leading versus managing.
Yes, and you'll hear more about that. There's a great book by Liz Wiseman that most of the Valley is studying right now called The Multipliers. And basically a leader, a coach, which differentiates them from a manager, is a leader seeks to energize, educate, and empower, to get people's hearts beating fast and their passion really coming up, teaches them something in the process, and then empowers them to do it on their own and allows them to make mistakes and fail, and then helps them back up and says, what did you learn from that? Let's do it again. The opposite of that is a diminisher. A diminisher is a genius with 1,000 helpers. I have an answer, go build it. And no one wants to work for somebody like that. And Bill started out in the early part of his career as a diminisher, and he had a group of individuals who loved him enough to say, if you keep on like this, we probably don't want to work for you anymore. And he snapped out of it and reinvented himself.
So, Brad, during your tenure as CEO of Intuit, you changed the mission of the company towards powering prosperity around the world. Tell us why, and tell us, how does that impact you personally?
Yeah, so first of all, we changed the mission. It's a team sported into it. There's 9,000 strong, and all 9,000 are owners and operators, and they're all trained on design thinking, which is what you all were going through, so that we can all innovate and improve and change the world together. But if you look over our 36-year history, you'll see the kitchen table that Scott Cook originally started the company at when he watched his wife struggle to balance their family banking account. And he said, there has to be a better way. And on that day, an idea for a product called Quicken came to life, but a mission for a company called Intuit was put into the world. Over 36 years, the words to describe that mission have changed 4 times, but the spirit really never did. It's basically to enable people who struggle to make it paycheck to paycheck to live with less stress, find a way to have more money in their pocket, and have complete confidence they have control over their livelihood. If you go to where we were just 3 years ago when we decided to refresh the mission, 2 things were happening. One was this generation coming right now into the workforce cares more deeply than any generation before you about the why. Why does this company exist? Does it do good in the community? Does it try to do good in the environment? Does it build products that are socially responsible? I want to know that I'm working for a values-based company. And our mission at the time was 16 words and had a comma. I used fewer words in a paragraph. And so we said, we need to really see how to describe our why in a much more relevant and contemporary fashion. So we looked up the 50 top mission statements, and what you found is they were succinct and aspirational. And so we went to work, and we wanted something that would describe the ability for us to leave people feeling like they were flourishing, thriving, and had good fortune and control over their lives. And we landed on actually first 2 words, powering prosperity. And then at the end, we said, but we are a global company, and if you looked at the best practices of others, they often said around the world. Amazon must be the world's biggest bookstore, so we added around the world. So powering prosperity around the world is how we got there. And it was, every single word was dissected, debated, chosen, and then we unveiled it, we agreed to it, and everyone grabbed their swords and put them in the middle and said, King Arthur, we're all here, and we went for it.
There were a lot of factors at that time that we were looking at. Social, economic, technological.
Yeah.
And how did those impact some of the things that we move forward with?
Right. Well, when I mentioned a few minutes ago, 9,000 employees, all trained on design thinking, all owners and operators. One thing that differentiates Intuit from many other Valley companies is everyone in the company gets stock. Everyone is an owner. Many companies have directors and above, vice presidents and above, but everyone, including our executive assistants, so those that actually support, sometimes called secretaries, but ours actually aren't secretaries or executive assistants and do a lot more, everyone in the company gets stock. And so one of the things that we've learned to do is we form these things called action learning projects, which is we will hand select individuals at all levels in the organization to work directly for the office of the CEO for a period of time to help us solve a big problem that we can't figure out how to solve on our own. And 3 years ago, there were 10 questions that were keeping me awake at night, and the board, and our founder, Scott Cook. And so we wrote them down, and we wanted to know, what will artificial intelligence and machine learning mean to our customers and our products in 10 years? What will kids born after the invention of the iPhone in 2007, how are their brains formed differently than ours, and how will our products need to be able to treat them 10 years from now? So those are blockchain, cryptocurrency. So we actually formed these action learning teams. We ended up having the top 150 leaders get together in 3-person teams. They fanned out across 5 continents. They did over 500 direct observations of customers. We interviewed 225 CEOs and expert companies. We shadowed everyone from Amazon to, I shadowed Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, Marissa Meyer. So we went and learned from those leaders. And then we came back and they wrote a 6-pager. It's an Amazon tool where you write a narrative that says, here's what we observed. As a result, these are the implications for us, and here's what we think we ought to do differently at Intuit if we want to be relevant the next 10 years. That's the easy part. Then you have protagonist and antagonist debates. So someone has to write a do it, and someone writes the do not do it, or else we'll be in trouble. And we had those debates, and ultimately what we landed on was a refresh of our mission and our strategy and our direction now that's drove the fastest growth in the company in the last 19 years happened last year.
Yeah, those were great times. That's the advantage of being a CEO, by the way. When you have questions keeping up at night, you can get lots of people to do work to go answer
That's when you learn to lead with questions and not answers. I assure you, if I had tried to answer that question, we would have not had the depth of thinking we had from all these wonderful teams that went out and did the work.
That was great.
Yeah.
That's very great. So these folks are all winners of an innovation competition.
Yes, you are. Very proud of you. I love the work that you did, too. It was amazing.
Super exciting.
Yeah.
So we're going to turn a little bit more personal now. So what advice would you give to them, especially on innovation, entrepreneurship, and then we can talk about
career second?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so innovation, entrepreneurship, 2 things. In fact, it was fun when we were just doing this little card of what's my one piece of advice, and I'll come back around to that if we want. But I would say 2 things. One is dream big. If you want to have a big business, solve a big problem. If you want to have a little business, solve a little problem. So that translates for me into the one word I have, which was impact. I think for about 15 years, the Silicon Valley lost its way, and we began solving for exits and financial outcomes and quick things that we could do on an app, and we stopped trying to solve the big problems, and I think we're back to trying to solve the big problems, like autonomous driving and how to figure out space exploration, how to solve healthcare, how to get water into those parts of the world that don't have access to water. Those are the problems the world needs solved. We don't necessarily need another video game. And so that would be the one thing I would say. Dream big. The second is perseverance. If you get a chance, there's a book out here called Getting to Plan B by Randy Komisar, who works for Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Bayer. And what it basically says is 93% of the businesses that you'll see up on the signs as you drive up and down the Silicon Valley didn't succeed on their first idea. 93% of them succeeded on a second, third, or fourth idea. They had to pivot and persevere. And so my second piece of advice is perseverance. So dream big and perseverance.
Brad, what is the proudest moment you've had at Intuit and then in life?
Oh my God.
It was graduation day.
Yeah,
I know, you've had some pretty big moments, but let's start at Intuit.
You know, there are so many moments that I've been proud of our company because of the work we do and the impact we have. And when you hear a mother in India describe to you because of the product we created, she can send her girls to school. And she said girls on purpose because many times there, when there's not enough money, the male child goes to school and the girl does not. And it, as a father of daughters, it melted my heart. But I would say perhaps the most proud for me is any job we ever have is to leave it better than we found it and to find someone more capable than us to step in and continue that path. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we executed a smooth succession plan, and we have a leader in place now that I think will take the company to the next level, and we did it without hiccuping in the process. We had a smooth transition. So I'm very proud to say that we have the right leader for the next chapter, and I was a part of helping try to set that foundation so that he and the team can take us to the next level.
That's multiplying.
Yeah, that's multiplying.
At its
That's
best.
correct. Yeah.
All right, so how about personally?
In life. Well, any parent would tell you their most proud days would be when their children are born. And since I have 2 children, I'm going to say it's a tie. But it really is the truth, and it hit me this past weekend when they were graduating, and I watched my babies down there, and they had their tassels, and they moved them from one side to the other, and in a sea of people. And if you see Ohio State, they had 70,000 people in the stands. The only place I know that can fill a stand for graduation was 70,000 people. And they had 17,000 or so students going through it. And as I was looking for the picture, for those who don't know, their first concert I took them to is I took them to a KISS concert, because that was my favorite group when I was a kid. They were 4 and 6. So in this sea of graduates, their mom called and said, "Dad's going to take a picture. What zip code are you in?" They said, "We're about the 25th yard line." So I take a picture, can't even pick them out. And then when I blow it up, I see that. All these others are standing in line, and I see a daughter like that. And I did the same thing at law school and saw the same thing. I said, "Those are my girls." I'm so proud of them. They've become better versions of who they are, but they haven't forgot who they were in the process. They're still daddy's babies.
Nice. So, I've heard you say, I spent the first 20 years of my life trying to get out of West Virginia, and
Yeah.
the last 20 trying to get back.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is the reality that I think we face as a state. We're one of the few states that has a declining population. We aren't always ranked where we want to be on these different national rankings. And when we are number one, it's not for the things we want to be number one for, whether it's opioid addiction or other things. But my heart never left. I did spend 22 years looking for a way out and the rest of my life looking for a way home. And the reason why I've spent time talking about this is because I left because I didn't think I could achieve my dreams in West Virginia. But you heard me reference King Arthur a few minutes ago. My office has a round table with King Arthur, and all the swords are in the middle. And if you know the history, there's no head of the table. Everyone was an equal at the table. And written in Latin is leadership through serving others. And so the reason why I tell you that story is because if you know the story of King Arthur, they lose their way for a period of time. And Arthur sends his knights out on a quest to find the Holy Grail, because he thinks if they find the Holy Grail, they'll find the secret. And finally, one of the knights returns, Percival, and he looks at King Arthur, and he literally looks like he's aged 30 years. He said, "I could not get the Grail, but I found the secret. That which you seek cannot be found, it must be made. The land and the king are one." And Arthur stood up and said, "We will once again ride." And when he stood up, the trees began to blossom again, and the knights came back, and Camelot restored its glory. Sometimes as kids coming out of West Virginia, we think that that which we seek cannot be found in West Virginia. We have to go elsewhere. But the truth is that which we seek has to be made. We've got to rebuild our state, one business at a time. And we've got to rebuild the dreams, one dream at a time. And we have found the magic elixir of King Arthur's Holy Grail. Bring the Silicon Valley techniques and put them in the hands of you. The Silicon Valley has never seen you before. They are blown away. When we flew the first group of you out here 2 years ago, everyone at Google and Apple and Facebook said, "Where do we get more of them?" You know why? Because 93% of the businesses out here that succeed don't succeed at first, and you have to have perseverance, and West Virginians are made of steel. We know how to overcome adversity. We get back up and dust ourselves off. So we give you the secrets of the valley, and we put it in your hands. You can build the next Intuit, the next Amazon, the next Google, and you can do it right in West Virginia. So you don't have to leave. If you choose to leave, you'll probably discover, like me and Izzy Rogner and all the others, your heart will never leave, and someday you'll look for a way to go back. So do what you need to do, but never forget where you came from, and let's give everybody the opportunities to pursue their dreams.
Love it. I think it's a good time to turn the questions over to you all. So
Questions?
with that, I know you sent a bunch of questions, so I know you have some, so don't, but instead of me reading them, I would love to hear what's on your mind after hearing what Brad's talked about so far.
We never got to career advice either.
Oh, well.
Yeah, we can always do that too. Yeah.
So I was wondering, what is the biggest thing you've learned this year?
So I'm going to repeat the question
Yes.
for the benefit of these guys. What is the biggest thing you've learned this year?
The importance of having a why. And I'll explain. I have been working with the board and with a personal plan to step out of the CEO job for 3 years. At the 11-year mark, I thought would be the right time, and then we would move on and have the successor. And put all my energy into that. And then on January 2nd, I looked up and said, now what? And what I discovered is we are all motivated by a purpose greater than ourselves. And right now, I'm still in search of that purpose. And truthfully, over the last 100 days, that purpose has become more clear. It's you. It's those in Appalachia who have the dreams and the talent and are simply looking for the connections and the opportunity to say, how can I make my dream be great? And I'm going back to my karate instructor days. I can't wait to watch the greatness in you emerge, and then I'm going to live vicariously through you. That's my next chapter. But you need a why in life. You need a cause bigger than yourself. Yes?
So I hear you talk a lot, and basically I kind of observed that you like to serve others and like invest your time at others. So what would you say is the hardest part about your job?
So, Brad, since you like to serve others so much, what is the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job is when you have to make a decision that because of strategic changes or environmental issues, you have to negatively affect someone. They may have been working just as hard as they were yesterday. They may be really good people, but the company may need to pivot and move off of desktop and move to the cloud, and they may be really steeped in desktop skills, and you try to retrain them, and they just can't get that new technology, and you have to help them find something else. And that's really hard because we do at Intuit, and I do personally believe that work can be personal and professional, and we call Intuit family members. And so that's really hard for me is when I have to look someone in the eye and say, you're a great person, you're just no longer a great fit for this role. And then how can I help you find the next chapter? That's really hard. Yes?
What's the biggest mistake that you made, and what did you learn from it?
I've made quite a few. And if you read the LinkedIn articles, the blog posts that I've put out there, there's one famous one called the $40 million mistake. And so I won't repeat that one because you can quickly read it. It's just about 4 paragraphs. But I did waste $40 million and learned a ton from it. And I think that helped me be a better leader. But if I had to kind of step back and look at the full body of work, I think my full body of work would be the ability to move fast. At times, I still want to go back to that 4th grade spelling bee where I studied for the midterm second day of the semester, and I put a lot of planning and preparation in. And sometimes life doesn't have that kind of time clock. You got someone coming out of a dorm room or a garage that's moving really quickly, and you've got to be able to move at the velocity of life, not at the velocity of your personal comfort. So if I could go back, I'd say my biggest mistake is to be uncomfortable and just go fast and be okay with a little bit of looseness and make a few mistakes and pick it up along the way and just keep moving forward. It's a pace. Yes?
What are some habits that I should develop as becoming aspiring to become a CEO?
Yes.
Habits that I should develop.
So, excuse me, habits, what are some of the habits that people should develop to become a CEO?
Yeah. The number one thing I can tell you that you will find as a struggle, you probably did as a student, you will at any level in the organization, and definitely as a CEO, is managing your time. So there are 3 resources we have in life. We have access to dollars, access to people and talent, and access to time. You can usually get more dollars even if a friend will Venmo you some money. A family member, you can usually get more talent because sometimes the friends will show up and help you move on the weekend. And hey, I'll do that as long as you buy me a beer later. But you can never get more time. No one can lend you time. You only have 24 hours in a day. And so there is a technique that I've learned, and I actually practice very diligently, as I start out every year and say, okay, with the work I know I have ahead of me, what % of my time am I going to spend here, here, and here? And for example, to turn it into CEO language, I take 100 points and I say 40% of my time is going to be running staff meetings, product reviews, strategy reviews. It's about planning. 30% of my time will be coaching and growing our talent. One-on-ones, town halls, keynotes. 20% is going to be outside our four walls, learning from others. So I go shadow Andy Jassy and Jeff Bezos and Sheryl Sandberg, and I take notes and I turn it into a book report and I come back and teach the company. And then 10% is my own personal growth. I read a book a week. I watch the opening bell of CNBC, and I read the Wall Street Journal every day. And so then with that sort of 40, 30, 20, 10, my assistant color codes every appointment I put on my calendar, one of those four colors, and every month she prints out a pie chart, and I compare it against whether I'm 40, 30, 20, 10, and if I'm not, I change my behavior. Believe me, it will be the technique that will help you the most. And here's one other little cheat tip. Don't do 1-hour meetings, do 45-minute meetings. And take the 15 minutes between every meeting to stay up on your email and your Slack. That way you don't end up with 150 in your inbox in the evening or all weekend. People want immediacy. 45-minute meeting, 15 minutes of email. 45-minute, 15 minutes email. And then you're up to speed. Time management.
It took me 3 times asking you about how you answered emails before you told me that secret.
I know, it was the holy grail once you go searching.
Yeah, right. I had to learn. Others? Yes.
You mentioned that you read a book a week. Us starting out, what would be the #1 book that you would recommend for us to read?
Oh, I've got so many favorite books, but for where you are in your chapter of your journey, one of the most profound books I've read in the last 2 years, and I've recommended to everyone who is where you are in life, is The Defining Decade. It is written by a psychologist who has studied 30 years of tracking people through their life to help determine what are the most important things you need to do in your 20s that will set you up for success the rest of your life. And there's a whole lot of competing theories with, I'll go take a year off and do a gap year. It's okay to be a barista for a while. Do whatever. And then the other side is, I don't know what I'm going to do, and therefore I'm afraid if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to be off track. And she does a wonderful job of helping you think through it. So if you can read one book, reading The Defining Decade. It is awesome. And if you're a parent, read The Defining Decade. It is awesome. How about others? Yes?
So other than the design thinking, what do you think higher education in West Virginia should do to try to move to Virginia?
I have spent the last 5 years trying to lead with questions to better understand, because my 2 passions are education and entrepreneurship. I think they're the great equalizers, and I think that's how Appalachia and West Virginia will be able to once again rise from where we are today and show the world that you can follow us, we can blaze trails. If you study all the best practices, and there's a bunch of them out there, Harvard's actually got a book coming out right now that talks about some of this, written by Clay Christensen. He's the guy who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution, but he basically talks about how companies get disrupted because they get too comfortable with who they are, and they're not willing to reinvent themselves. But if I had to boil it down, this is Brad's version of it. I call it the 4 Ds and the 4 Cs. Sounds like a report card in need of improving. The 4 Ds are the 4 skills that every student's going to need to have some baseline understanding of coming out of high school or college. The first is design thinking, discovery-driven planning, if-then, run experiments, see if it works, and quickly pivot. The second is developer acumen. You may not write code, you may not be an engineer, but you'll need to understand with 1 or 2 courses how code is written, because that's the new way of expressing your ideas is in code. The third is design as a craft, also known as the arts. If you look at the winning technology, it's the ones that are the simplest and easiest to use. We cannot lose our love for the arts. And design is the way that technology wins, the easiest stuff. Apple's iPhone versus all the other complicated ones. And then the fourth is data acumen, also known as business statistics. So I think the skills we want to be teaching all of our students at some early age is the ability to come out and say, I know how to have agile design thinking. I love making things simple and artistic. I love knowing how ideas get expressed in technology. And I have some understanding of how math matters. Because today, the winning professional baseball teams are managed by something called Moneyball, which is statistics. Put the best, this runner with that, if you ever watch the movie, it's amazing. The 4 Cs are how we need to change the environment in the classroom. A connected classroom. Online, on-site at an extension facility, or on campus. All should be equally high quality. The second is the ability to focus on competency versus credit hour accumulation. Little secret, Silicon Valley does not just look at your resume and your GPA and say, wow, let's hire him. Every one of you will be taken through something called Assessing for Awesome. We test your craft. We test you through a set of skills to see if you actually know what we think you should know coming out of university, because there's grade inflation happening across the world right now. Professors are getting graded by their students, and this is not professors, but it basically has caused a phenomenon that now we're doing this competency. So connected classroom competency. The third is focus on completion rates versus enrollment. I think we all know the stats. 51% of kids who go to four-year college graduate in 6 years. 49% never graduate, but they do come out with student loan debt. And then they're actually labeled college dropouts the rest of their life. We need to start to move more to certification, 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, doesn't matter. If you get some learning, you get some value back. And that would be the third. And then the fourth, I would say, is community. I would love to see the classroom stop doing the Acme case study and start going downtown and working with the local Dunkin' Donuts owner and say, we're going to run an experiment, see if we can help you improve your sales, and that's a part of my grade. So the 4 Ds are the skills. The 4 Cs are connected, competency, completion rates versus enrollment, and community involvement. And I think we need to embrace the love of vocational and technical schools again. Every high school should have the ability to build again in our repertoire. We don't do that. And so now we have this college or bust, and we have way too many people who are the have-nots, and I think it's caused a problem. That's my 10-minute pitch. And it's a system. We all need to work together, high schools and colleges.
Oh, sorry.
I have 6 children back in West Virginia.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you're saying. In fact, when you spoke by a teleconference at the competition, I really connected with what you were saying about changing West Virginia. Years ago, when I was first going into college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I got the idea, I'll go to nursing homes, and I'll meet with people who have lived their lives. And I remember seeing this old gentleman, must have had a stroke, slobbering.
Mm-hmm.
And I went over and asked him that question. And he looked at me and he said, Tim, don't ever get to the point where you're sitting in this chair and all you can do is look at that wall and think about all the things you wish you would have done.
Right.
Well, that changed my life, and I started taking more risks. So my question is, what's the biggest risk that you took that ended up being successful?
I have taken quite a few, and there are personal risks, there are professional risks, and I would say probably the greatest one was my willingness to call something that wasn't working or I knew wasn't right for me and be okay walking away. So I'll give you an example. When I came out of high school, I was appointed to West Point. My mother and father had enough money to send my older brother to school, but not me. I could have easily, back then student loans weren't as prevalent, so I could have gotten a job like a lot of people did, but I had enough under my belt that I got appointed by Senator Byrd to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was my dad's pride and joy. He could not believe he had a son going to West Point. He was so excited that I got excited. I didn't even have a backup school. I didn't think about Marshall or anything else. I went to West Point. I joined the Army. I went through basic training. I went through the first half of my plebe year. I had a girlfriend back home who was in a sorority at Marshall, and she's writing about the sorority parties, and I'm marching at 4 in the morning, and I find out the Army's not right for me. Despite that, I had gotten grades. I was in the 5% club, which is the top 5% of the students, and I came home at Christmas and told my mom and dad, I'm resigning. This isn't for me. And they were aghast. They couldn't believe it. You are in an institution that has a storied history, and presidents come out of there, and you want to leave, and you're doing well. And I said, but it just doesn't make my heart sing. And I remember they both accepted that responsibility, and gave me that authority to do that, and I made that decision, and the rest is history. I have a school that I fell in love with at Marshall University that I can't stop talking about. I wear Marshall everywhere I go. I have a state that I'm proud of, and I have a passion that's pushed me through the rest of my life. But I had the willingness to take the risk and give up something that looked perfect for somebody else, but was not perfect for me. If you find yourself in that situation, just like that elderly gentleman, don't stare at the wall and say, what could I have done? Find something else. Just do it.
That reminds me of a movie I saw last night. I told these guys we did a little icebreaker, And one of the characters, it's called Alpha, since you're such a movie person, but
Yeah.
I'll bet you haven't
I
seen it.
haven't seen this one, no.
No. It's about dogs, but it's about
I'm not surprised.
it's about humans became connected with dogs. I'm getting to a point, the point is the character that actually connected with the dogs. The thing they said with them about him all the time was he leads with his heart and not his spear.
Yeah, I love that.
So
I will offer this last piece for you, career advice, because that kind of got alluded to, and then I got to talking long, and we never got back to it. There are 3 things that I would offer to you just as something that someone gave me along the way as a gift that I think have helped me a lot. The first is always choose the franchise over the role. What that means is choose a company whose why, whose purpose you would be proud to associate your name with, and who will surround you with challenges that will stretch you and grow you, and actually sometimes push you to the point where you make mistakes and fail, because that's where you're going to grow. And choose that company over the job title and the money. Too many people say, hey, I want to go be a CEO now, or I want to go be a product manager, and then they find they're miserable because they're in an environment that doesn't invest in them. So the first thing, chose the franchise over the role. The second, my dad gave me a piece of advice. Volunteer for the job nobody else wants. When you do that, 2 things happen. The first is you get put in a circumstance where they're usually taking resources away from it, and you're asked to do a lot with little, and it's going to force you to be innovative and creative, and you're going to learn things you wouldn't learn in an otherwise perfect situation. And the second is your bosses are going to start to think of you as the go-to person. Every time they need something done, but nobody wants to do it because it's not the cool new technology, it's yesterday's technology. If you raise your hand, the next time a good thing comes up, they're going to say, pick him. Every time we've needed somebody, he's been willing to jump in the ditch and do it. It's his turn. And that's actually how I got to where I am. I always volunteered for the job nobody else wanted. Third and final tip, treat success and failure exactly the same as an opportunity to learn. Because you will learn, just as I just shared here, and every CEO who's ever been interviewed will tell you, you will learn more from your scar tissue than your ribbons. Do not be afraid to make mistakes and to take risks. If you are trying to go for perfection, you're going to be an incrementalist. If you're actually swinging for the fences, the best baseball player in history, Ted Williams, struck out 6 out of 10 times, and he is still the all-time greatest batting average. He struck out 6 out of 10 times. So if you're not striking out at least half as many times, you aren't dreaming big enough. This is my final quote. I love this quote. I heard this from somebody. If your dreams are big enough to be accomplished by yourself, you're not dreaming big enough. You need a team. That's it.
love it. Thank you, Brad.